Came across some research recently that I think you'll find helpful for this class, especially as you start to think about what you're going to do for the project, which is an implementation roadmap for your organization. So this paper appeared in March of last year in MIS Quarterly Executive. Now, MIS Quarterly is the premier research journal for information systems researchers. But some of the research in there can get quite arcane, and so practitioners often don't read it. And so this MIS Quarterly Executive is a way to make, to provide something for practitioners that they can actually use that nevertheless has the rigor of the work that appears in MIS Quarterly. So this particular paper discusses, it's called Successfully Organizing AI Innovation Through Collaboration with Startups. And the central problem is this. Most established firms just don't have the AI skills necessary to do an in-house implementation. These firms will have, a wide range of capabilities in everything that they need for their competitive advantage, but not necessarily these kinds of technical skills. Even if they have a lot of technical skills, such as Facebook, they may not necessarily have the particular AI skills that are needed to get, a certain large machine learning project up off the ground. So the fact is that these larger firms, the most likely approach to this is they're going to work with small startups. And I think in the Artificial Intelligence in Practice book, we came across several cases where large companies such as Disney or John Deere did exactly this, where they had an idea for what they could do and they worked with an AI startup. So the issue is that AI startups tend to work closely with universities to develop this talent, and kind of like this revolving door, the graduates tend to want to work in these small companies, these startups, because it's more entrepreneurial, it's more exciting. The technical jobs that are in these larger firms tend to be kind of smaller, less impactful kinds of enhancements to existing big systems and building modules and stuff like that. So this is why you tend to have to reach out to these startups to try to get this talent. So what they did for this research was to ask the question, what challenges can an established firm expect when doing an AI startup collaboration? Okay, so you can see why this kind of approach to research would have such appeal for a practitioner, because if they get the idea, they want to know what to expect. And then, of course, following on that, so how do we address those challenges? So what can we expect, and then what can we do about those problems? And the method that the researchers chose was something they called an insider-outsider ethnography. So an ethnography just means that you embed yourself in some kind of organizational situation or a culture to kind of learn in depth what goes on. So not just interview people, but to actually stay there for a while, watch what's actually happening and talk to different people, observe them, maybe participate. And so that's what they did here. One of the authors actually worked for one of the AI startups. So they were able to have an insider perspective as well as an outsider perspective. And so they worked with these two AI startups that were working with 6 established firms on particular AI implementations. So here, these were the cases that they looked at. So each column is one of the companies, one of the larger established firms, and the use case that they wanted to do. So for example, in the first column there was a telecom company that wanted to set up a way for their customer service representatives on the phone to get some kind of artificial intelligence to generate recommended responses that they could then send along to the customers or edit if they want to. So their goal here was to increase their call center capacity, because this is less thinking that they have to do, for routine things. They have a kind of standard set of responses that they want to give. So this was what they wanted to do. Obviously, this is a natural language processing application. So in use case number 2, the established firm wanted to be able to generate a bunch of emails that are tailored for particular customers, rather than having human salespeople write emails to generate leads. They wanted to have an AI that would intelligently compose them in a way that they won't just be ignored or thrown away or picked up by spam. So they wanted to be able to increase their sales. That was their main goal with that. Okay, use case number 3, they wanted to be able to improve their system so that there's an AI that it's a 911 emergency dispatchers. They wanted something that can listen to the conversation, so the phone call, and then automatically pre-populate some forms based on what the person having the emergency said. So this is going to increase the speed. So it does this natural language processing, the speech to text, and then it knows, oh, okay, well, this person's already given their name, they've already stated their address, so that the dispatcher doesn't have to type it out. So in use case number 4, it was an insurance company that sold insurance to fleets. So, a lot of companies might have a fleet. Radford University has certain cars, and companies have cars that they can lend out to employees for whatever. But those they often buy insurance as a package. Now, what they wanted to set up with this implementation was a machine learning tool that would predict the optimal price. So they wanted to be able to look at previous pricing data, and then rather than have to go through all this long processing to determine the best price, they could just have the machine learning algorithm determine the price. So it's just straight machine learning. And that was to increase their profit margin. So use case number 5, what they actually wanted to do here was they wanted an AI to recommend to customers who make a claim. They wanted to use machine learning to determine whether it was optimal for this particular customer to go to a garage that worked with the insurance company versus just finding another repair person. So again, it's a machine learning algorithm to predict a yes/no answer about this customer. And then finally, use case number 6, they wanted to come up with a dynamic pricing algorithm for financial services products. And that, again, was more like a machine learning. So you see that the first 3 cases really mostly involved natural language generation and natural language understanding. And the second 3 tended to be more machine learning type applications. Okay, so it was 6 different companies, 6 different use cases, and it was 2 different AI startups. I think startup 1 did the first 3, startup 2 did the other 3. So they looked at what went on with this partnership and identified 5 main challenges, and then provided some recommendations for how to get around these challenges. So challenge number 1 was finding the right startup. And what makes that a problem is that AI obviously is a buzzword. There are some companies that don't really do AI, but they say they do AI because it'll attract customers. And so there's that problem. There's also the problem that it's difficult to evaluate a small company that doesn't have a track record. You don't have these testimonials, these showcase clients. They don't have a track record, so it's kind of hard to tell whether they're any good. And if they are good, they tend to be snapped up really quickly. So it's not really a small startup anymore. And so maybe they are acquired by an established firm, and now they have become an in-house unit. Okay, so the recommendations for dealing with this are to look for signals of quality, that is, contests that they won, grants that they were awarded, and accreditations. So there are also ways of getting a sense of their AI capability by looking at, well, are they good at other things that are kind of related to AI, such as strategy and IT? And then also it's perfectly fine to look at the academic achievements of the employees. That is, any kind of degrees that they have, any research that they've published, and then of course open source contributions. So a lot of times there will be hobbyist programmers that work for these companies, and they have things on GitHub that kind of show off what they can do. It's perfectly fine to look for that. Challenge number 2 is identifying the right use case. And this is something that you've done a couple of times now for this class, where I've asked you, okay, well, now that you know what this particular tech can do, what's a use case? How can you use this in your particular company? So the challenge here is that established firms have a hard time seeing through their existing processes. They say, look, this is very efficient. We can get this done. I don't see where we're going to make an improvement here. And the second, of course, they don't know what AI can do. Can it, how accurate is it? Can I just speak to it? Or, so not knowing the capabilities and not being able to see any problems with the processes, that makes them kind of difficult to really think about what they can do with AI. So the recommendations for these are to engage in joint idea generation workshops. So with the startup and the company, you just throw out some brainstorming ideas, and there are various collaboration tools that help with this, where you have a system where people are throwing out ideas and they're judging each other on, judging the quality of the ideas and maybe voting some up, voting some down. Various tools for that. Nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned, sitting in the room and shouting at a whiteboard. That tends to work really well. And they also recommend that you prioritize impact over feasibility. Sometimes projects are decided strictly because, well, we have the data for them. But what tends to happen over time is that when there are budget cuts, these projects that were selected simply for their cost feasibility tend to be the first things to be cut. So the real focus should be on the value creation. So rather than thinking just about, well, we have all this data, so we'll go ahead and use it to do something. It's really better to think about what's going to be a high impact. Okay, challenge number 3 is agreeing on the right commercial terms and conditions. So this means actually setting up the contract. And this is, of course, different incentives. So the established firm and the startup partner don't have the same incentives. The established firm obviously wants to have something in place as quickly as possible, as low a cost as possible. The startup firm, they have a different set of incentives. They want to get as much money as they can and actually prolong the project as long as they can, especially if they're paid per month or something. So this creates a problem, this problem of incentives, not being aligned. So the recommendations for handling this are, first, to make incentives that are based on performance. So instead of simply paying for the startup's product, make their compensation dependent on the actual performance. So you can actually determine, okay, well, let's come up with some kind of measurement of quality, measurement of performance, to make sure that what we're getting is actually something good. And then the compensation of the startup will be tied to that performance. And so what that means is that they are incentivized to create something that's going to really work for what you want it to do, and not simply prolong the project to collect money that way. And part of this is to work with the AI startup on exactly how performance is measured. Okay, so if you make this AI tool that generates these messages to the customers, and the customer service representative reads them and decides on whether to send them on or how to edit them, how do you measure the performance of that? Is it how quickly the messages are generated, how relevant they are, how often they have to edit them, or whether there's actually any kind of improvement in speed? You might just say, okay, well, they have to edit them so much that there's not really any kind of improvement. So you have to work together to determine what are going to be fair and measurable standards, and then that way you can agree on a compensation plan and get your incentives aligned. Challenge number 4, and this is the case whether you're dealing with startups or not, considering the impact on people. So user acceptance is always critical for realizing the envisioned impact aspect of technology. So you have this idea of what technology can do, and it's always going to depend on how much people accept it. You can force them to use it, but you can't force them to accept it because they'll be using it in suboptimal ways. Well, I was going to say something about two-factor authentication and its acceptance, but we'll leave that aside for now. Well, so acceptance is especially difficult with AI because AI can be a threat. So people can conceive that this looks like a replacement. My personal skills are being obsoleted here. So acceptance is a lot harder with AI. So here are the recommendations that they make about this. So work with the startup partner on a delivery mode that ensures users are fully on board. Usually this involves some training, some kind of clarification about exactly where it's going to be used, and some kind of reassurance that it's not going to be a replacement for human. Another recommendation is to start with low autonomy. If you start with a tool that does everything, it's completely autonomous. This tends to make people very uncomfortable, and they don't want to delegate that much decision-making authority to the algorithm. So what you want to start off with is low autonomy systems. So in the chatbot case, they gave the operator the option of changing the message. So the final judge of what message goes out to the customer was the operator and not the AI. In the insurance case, so the machine learning algorithm did come up with a price, but the final call on that price was made by a professional underwriter. So they were able to look at the recommendation, and I don't know if that system was explainable, so the underwriters could go through the logic, but ultimately the final call was the underwriter. And so that kind of inhibited the full autonomy of the AI, and that helped with acceptance. And another thing, and this is unique to the startup case, is the role of the startup could be as a knowledge provider, which can be something that's good and exciting. Employees really like upskilling, so having the opportunity to learn something new and cool, this is something that the employees are going to like. And the startup could have the role of providing these workshops. And so they are, viewing them as a knowledge provider is helpful in this acceptance process. Okay, and finally, challenge number 5 are the standard implementation roadblocks that you get involving stakeholders, and there's this issue of organizational and procedural maturity. Several of you in your papers have talked about where you work, and you recognize that there are some weaknesses. There's some things that don't work really well. There's some resistance to putting new technology or new systems into place, or you say we're really backward. Well, everybody feels that way. Everybody feels that way. But there are organizations that have standard operating procedures. They have really good processes in place. They have ERP systems in place. And then they have a great deal of organizational maturity. And so they are going to be more ready. But some are just not. And so what do you do about that? Well, okay, so on the challenge of involving stakeholders, they recommend creating cross-functional teams, and this is a good thing all around. Cross-functional teams is a good concept for addressing a lot of problems, whether it's stakeholder understanding or problem scoping. Generally, getting lots of different kind of experts together tends to yield some really good results. So the data scientists, so the data engineers, IT, the area experts, people in the functional areas, management. The more diverse skill set you have on this team, the more effective you can be, especially when it involving different parts of the organization. Okay, second, dealing with organizational maturity. Now, if you have good processes in place, that tends to be very receptive for any kind of new AI implementation. However, if you don't have that in place, that doesn't mean that it's impossible. What it means is that you have to delegate more to the startup, that the startup is going to have the more active role in actually determining when and how the AI is going to work. Which is, not ideal. As I said, there's that whole incentives issue, but sometimes the only way to get around really bad processes is to work with the startup, and they can do as much of the processing as you're comfortable with delegating to them. Okay, so this, I think, is a really good summary of the practical reality of what most of these kind of incumbent larger established firms are going to do. They're going to have to set up these partnerships and then deal with these various challenges with these recommendations.